Hi, I'm Tim Henriques with the Fantasy Book Ranking System, and in today's series we are going to review the Dragonlance Chronicles. Pretty classic, almost cult fantasy books that came out two or more decades ago. There's a 3 primary series and then a bunch of offshoots that shut off from this. So we have the Dragons of Autumn Twilight, which is what started the whole series, then the Dragons of Winter Night, and then the Dragons of Spring Dawning by Margaret West and Tracy Hickman. So these are kind of 3 classic books. I don't have them here sitting here in front of me, unfortunately, but they're pretty cool. And just to give you a quick heads up, I read these a long time ago. So I read these when I was about 15-ish, give or take, but maybe I'm probably actually even a little bit younger than that. I've since looked through them some. I have not done a full reread, so I am definitely going off of some memory here, which is both good and bad as we do the quick review to kind of check things out. But this is the original Dragonlance Chronicles. In case you haven't seen this review system before, we'll kind of run through it pretty quick. Basically, my goal is to help you, the reader, make better judgments. You can look on Amazon. Almost all books seem to get a 3.5 to 4.5 star rating. It's difficult to tell, people like it or don't like it, but they don't really, it's hard to know whether you would like their review. So what I wanted to do was rank all books compared to other popular books, so then you can decide, oh, I like what he likes, or maybe you don't like what I like, and then you can kind of go your own way. But the goal is to help you have a better understanding of what the book is about, not without spoilers, but kind of more key elements, and then you can decide if you want to read it yourself. And I'm also doing this to help myself. I am an aspiring author. I've written 2 non-fiction books, but trying to dip my toe in the fantasy world, and so I wanted to not compete with people, but I wanted to just see what they did well, maybe what they could do a little better, so I could learn from that in my own writing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank the book on 15 different scales. Usually it's 1 to 10, with a 10 being a super, super awesome, pretty rare book. Anything less than a 6 really sucks. Lots of things getting a 7, 8, 9 to kind of help differentiate there. I do pre-review most of the stuff that I read, just to make sure I'm not picking up crap. I just don't have enough time for that. And so other elements I'm simply going to describe. If I think there's flaws, if I think there's strengths, and then at the end of the review, I will give it its ultimate FABR score, and we can see what we got. So let's begin. So how epic is the story? Epic is broad and sweeping. How much does it cover? This is a pretty serious story. 9 could even kind of edge up in that 9+ zone. You've got gods and goddesses. You've got different planes. You've got people kind of covering the whole world. The earth, the world is in trouble, and so the heroes need to save it. So this is pretty broad. Game of Thrones, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings will get a 10. So it's up there, getting close to them. How well written is it? This is a little bit lower. This would be about an 8 here. I also do think this book particularly well suited for some younger readers and the kind of young teens, things like that. Again, when I read it, I thought it was super awesome when I first read it. I since tried to read it to my kids who were a little bit younger, and then it just didn't quite flow the same, didn't hold their attention. And so I do think, compared to some of the more epic fantasy out there now for adults, it doesn't quite hold its own. But for younger readers, it definitely still is pretty good. How real did it feel? It's a fantasy story. I don't think this one felt particularly real. I don't really feel like you were there with them. I felt like you were more kind of watching a movie in your head about how the story was unfolding. So 7.5 on that category. Something like First Law Trilogy, that nitty-gritty feel, would get a 10. What lessons are taught? I thought they were trying to teach some lessons. Again, I am going off of kind of 25, 30 years of memory here. But there's battles between good and evil, and I thought they were trying to impart certain things onto the reader. So I definitely enjoyed it. I'd say 8.5 for lessons taught. Is the book a page turner? Yeah, it definitely keeps you, once you keep reading, once you get involved with the characters, going from one series to the next, you want to find out what's going to happen. So I think you're pretty anxious. So reasonably decent on that, 8.5. Something like a Da Vinci Code or Maltese Falcon would get a 10. How memorable is the story? I thought it was quite memorable. I think that's one of the big strengths of this. I'd give this a 9. Again, I'm reviewing this 25 years later and still have a reasonable idea of kind of the key elements of the story, some of the big parts of it, and that's pretty significant. How memorable the main characters. Again, this is going to rank pretty high. A lot of people have heard of like Rastalin the Mage. He's kind of probably the most famous character, then spawned several novels after that. And so kind of the #1 character. But there's other pretty cool characters in there. Tanis. They introduced a whole new world. So if you truly like Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a pretty big Dungeons and Dragons nerd. So if you really like that, they introduced a whole new world with a whole new setting, and spawned a whole new gameplay and video games. So it was definitely pretty cool. So quite memorable main characters. Secondary characters also reasonably memorable. Again, with Kender thrown in and all sorts of Tasselhoff and fun stuff like that. Star Wars would get a 10, so it's not quite up there, but it's pretty good. You do want to find out what's going on in that next book, so 8.5 for reading the next book. So pretty solid. You want to continue with that story. How rereadable is it? I think this is going to lose some marks there, especially as you get a little older. You kind of know the story. I don't think it's written that deeply that then you just kind of want to pore over this and study it. So about a 7.5 for that. Very clear good and evil. So it's there's good deities and evil deities, and they're vying for power. So it's not ambiguous as to what's going on with good and evil on this. The magic, I'd call this a moderate world of magic, both among the world and then among the main characters. So not every character has magic, but some do. And then in the world, it's not an super uncommon thing to have magic. It's not something like people don't believe in. You can have this pretty young. So I was trying to read this to my kids that are pretty young. So I'd say 8+ if they're able to read it, or if they want to sit down and listen to it. So not, I don't remember, violence a little bit obviously, but like no sex, not much swearing, things like that. And the cool thing is this series finished? Yes. And then if you like it, there's a whole bunch of spawns that are also generally finished from it. So yes, that is pretty important, and it is finished. So what would I give this book overall? Well, first let's actually get to the flaws. So it's written a little bit more for those younger readers and teens. Again, I did not enjoy it as much as reading parts of it on a second time around. Secondary characters outside of the main party. So the party's pretty big, so whether you have main or secondary there, the other secondary characters, not incredibly memorable. If you like dragons, though, they do involve the Haymut and Tiamat, which is kind of cool in the Dragonlance world. My overall impression is very D&D based story, which to me is a strong plus, and they're kind of true to like D&D rules and the way that works. It popularized the world of Dragonlance, which became pretty awesome and very popular. The story is quite memorable, I mentioned that. The main characters, even years later, you can remember them pretty well, but it may not be so as appealing to adults. It's not written with the same kind of skill as, say, like Name of the Wind or Game of Thrones is. So if you're looking for that super high quality epic fantasy, then you'll probably this will be left wanting a little bit. So the book's overall score is an 81. Okay, so that's a solid, enjoyable book. Pretty highly recommended. It's not in that super rare category, although if you're a Dungeons and Dragons nerd or if you're a younger reader, then you probably would enjoy it more. If you're a really discerning reader who really likes that super well-written stuff, it might drop down into the high 70s. But for me, I give it an 81. Solid scores, cool, memorable story. Worth a read if you like it.